When economic inflation spikes or geopolitical tensions rise, voters naturally look for safety. Stamping the ballot for the longest-serving incumbent feels like hiring a specialist. You're selecting the candidate who already knows how to navigate the complex machinery of the state. But if lifelong political experience is the ultimate asset, we have to ask why heavily professionalized governments so frequently devolve into gridlock, systemic decay, and institutional sclerosis. This diagnostic checklist isolates the specific profile of the career politician. It starts with two structural dimensions: a full-time devotion to the political sector beginning in their youth, combined with a highly restricted occupational background, meaning they built their early careers entirely as legislative aides, lobbyists, or party organizers. The profile is completed by a severe lack of non-political work experience in the wider economy, paired with an intense ambition focused purely on climbing internal, hierarchical party ladders. We need to strip away the reflex that political tenure equals governance efficacy. By looking at the data, we can expose the structural liabilities built directly into the DNA of the lifelong politician. Voters buy the promise of stability. However, the structural incentives of lifelong tenure can transform that specialized procedural experience into a public liability. To understand the decline of leadership, we have to look at the economic inputs of the political pipeline. Why does the quality of the governing class seem to drop even when barriers to entry are high and salaries are generous? This flowchart tracks how the sector suffers from severe selection bias. Highly talented individuals with strong private sector earning potential often use politics merely as a showcase. They enter for a single term to display their skills to the public and then exit through a revolving door to capture much higher wages in private industry. Conversely, individuals whose political survival skills far outweigh their actual marketability choose to stay. They pool together over decades, forming an entrenched governing class, heavily incentivized to hold on to their positions because they lack lucrative alternatives outside of office. This ecosystem is known as the Mediocracy Trap. Paradoxically, increasing the salary of politicians can worsen this trap. Higher pay makes the office attractive to those with few private sector alternatives, potentially decreasing the average quality of individuals who stay in the sector. This mediocrity naturally leads to strict ideological rigidity. Rather than innovating, these politicians prioritize internal party mechanics and asymmetric demobilization. Asymmetric demobilization is a tactic where politicians focus on discouraging the voter turnout of opponents, rather than attempting to persuade anyone with new ideas. The modern professionalized political system actively filters out dynamic talent. What remains is a governing class motivated almost entirely by its own self-preservation. If the quality of the candidate pool is compromised, we have to examine the actual mechanics of their time in office. We often assume that decades in power provide a deep, practical understanding of how the real world operates. This graph plots tenure on the horizontal axis against public welfare on the vertical axis. In the early years, learning by doing is effective. The politician masters the bureaucratic landscape, allowing them to pass legislation and deliver public services faster than a newcomer. But as tenure extends into decades, the learning curve shifts. The exact same procedural mastery required to route a highway budget is eventually weaponized to become an opportunistic embezzler. Systemic corruption relies on intimacy, the long-term acquaintance between public officials and private entities required to bias tenders or execute regulatory capture. These established networks allow for the quiet distribution of unlawful licenses and biased contracts. Term limits are often criticized because lame duck politicians may extract petty rents on their way out of office. While strict term limits do increase the frequency of those short-term extractions, they can prevent the decades of stable network building required to capture an entire regulatory state. Beyond a specific threshold, a politician's procedural mastery stops working for the public. It transitions into a highly refined, extremely efficient tool for interest group appeasement. We can see the terminal endpoint of this process in Italy's First Republic leading up to the 1990s. It stands as a historical record of what happens when a career political class operates for decades without interruption. The system operated on consociational corruption. This is a framework where officially opposed political parties secretly share illegal practices and split the proceeds of public contracts to fund their respective political machines. These careerists created a hidden arena that effectively canceled out political competition. In this environment, bribery became the standard cost of democracy, allowing the elite to bypass accountability. This reached its terminal phase when the elite over-regulated public life specifically to increase the size of the bribes required to bypass that very regulation. The system collapsed under the Pulite inquiry. Pulite, or Clean Hands, was a massive judicial investigation that exposed this nationwide bribery network and dismantled the ruling parties. A political system captured by careerists can lose its structural accountability. As seen in the First Republic, the lack of external checks led to a total failure of the state apparatus. The career politician is essentially a high-performance engine. They are highly effective at moving legislation, but catastrophic if the vehicle lacks exceptional brakes. The true determinant of whether a career specialist succeeds or fails the system is institutional strength. This is measured by two factors: the strict independent enforcement of rules and the long-term stability of those rules. This matrix charts institutional strength against politician background. With high transparency and strong enforcement, career politicians safely manage complex state machinery. But the bottom right quadrant is the danger zone. A career specialist in low enforcement environments facilitates systemic sclerosis and cartelization. You can spot the real-world markers of weak institutions in your own environment: poor local journalism, a lack of independent financial audits, or unquestioned one-party dominance. In an environment lacking strong, independent democratic guardrails, voting for an experienced incumbent often supports continued cartelization over governance efficacy.